like any good meditator, when I noticed that my mind wandered off, I would try harder. And my mind wandered off every couple of minutes, so I was trying very hard, and I began to get very impatient and frustrated and very judgmental too, like, "What's wrong with me? Why can't I do this?" By the 5th day, a monk from London flew in who spoke English, and he asked how it was going, and I said, "Not so well." And I explained to him what was happening, and he looked at me with so much compassion and also a bit of humor, and he said, "Sweetheart, you're not practicing mindfulness. What you're practicing is striving and frustration and judgment and impatience. But listen, what you practice gets stronger." And those 5 words really changed my life. What you practice gets stronger. Our repeated experiences shape our brain. And mindfulness is not about striving and trying to get somewhere and trying to do it right. It's about paying attention with exquisite compassion, kindness, openness, with curiosity, being interested. Oh, wow, my mind wandered again. No big deal. It's just what it does. So that was really a pivotal moment in my practice and in my understanding of mindfulness.
This week's conversation with Dr. Shauna Shapiro helps us understand mindfulness, not as a determined undertaking of self-improvement, but mindfulness as a gentle way of being in the world. A way of being that opens us to the freedom of living with ourselves and others with more grace, peace, kindness, and compassion. An internationally recognized expert in mindfulness, Shauna's perspectives and teachings are richly informed from the blend of diverse relationships that she has with the practice of mindful awareness. A professor of counseling psychology at Santa Clara University, she is also a clinical psychologist and a researcher whose work explores the science behind how mindful awareness affects our physiology and our brains while it transforms our lives. Shauna has also been a dedicated student with her own mindfulness practice for more than 20 years. The author of extensive journal articles and her first critically acclaimed book, The Art and Science of Mindfulness. Shauna's is a vital voice in mindful living's rapid rise in the world's collective consciousness. I think few would argue the point that these are critical times in our human evolution, when attention to balanced, compassionate, and conscious living is needed now, perhaps more than ever. I'm Chess Edwards, and this is Beyond the Noise, conversations at the heart of modern-day living. I interviewed Dr. Shapiro in February of 2015. So hello there.
Hi, Chess.
It's so nice to have you here and on this beautiful Saturday, and I appreciate you taking your time to have this conversation.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you. Thank you. I came across your work through, I think initially through Facebook um, and then I saw a couple of your videos and was really intrigued with the work that you're doing and how clearly passionate you are and caring you are about the world of mindfulness and helping introduce that in various ways to others. So I'm really excited about having this conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah. One of the things that intrigues me, of the many things, but one of them is that as a researcher, as a researcher that looks at the applications of mindfulness and the effects of mindfulness, and also as a practitioner, as somebody who practices mindfulness in her own life, I'm curious about how having both of those viewpoints really benefits you when you're speaking to groups and audiences and individuals. You have this, like the art and the science of mindfulness at your disposal to be able to use to convey the benefits of mindfulness to others. I wonder if you could just talk about how having both those viewpoints is beneficial for you.
Yes, I feel grateful to have both of those touchstones of experience. I think For me, the most important thing is the personal experiential understanding of mindfulness practice. And out of my own practice and my own experience, questions or insights or curiosities arise. And so those inform the research questions that I ask and what I explore from a more scientific lens. And so I then bring those back into my practice. And so it kind of is this incredible synergistic effect where my meditation practice informs my research, research informs my meditation. And so when I'm speaking to audiences, I think it helps the practice come alive for them to feel my kind of deep connection with it on a personal level, but then
Mm.
for me to be able to explain a little bit of what's happening from a scientific lens.
Yeah, and that was the feeling I got as well. And I'd imagine that it also widens the audience that can hear you, because some people perhaps the what is more compelling is the scientific evidence about the neuroplasticity and the changes in the brain. And for other people, what's really compelling is the stories about how this can apply to help creating a more peaceful or joyful life.
Exactly. And I think there's many different doorways in, and what's most important is to meet people where they are. And what I find is that having a scientific understanding gives people sometimes the motivation or the sense of safety or security to go into these practices. A lot of times, someone will come to one of my talks and they'll say, "Oh, I really want my husband or my wife to learn about this, but they're so resistant to anything new agey." And so I always invite them to begin with the science and say, well, look at how it's impacting immune functioning and blood pressure and sense of happiness and decreasing anxiety and insomnia and depression, and kind of enter from a pragmatic stance.
Right. If their orientation is more of a goal orientation, to
Hmm.
meet them there. I love that.
Right. And
Yeah.
truthfully, sometimes I use it myself when I'm sitting and my mind starts to wander, thinking I should be working on something or I should be with my son. And then sometimes I'll just remind myself I'm taking care of myself right now, and I'll just reflect on some of the information I know. I'm creating neural pathways of ease and compassion right now, or, just as a way to, sometimes we need a concrete motivation, and sometimes may this be of benefit to all beings is enough to motivate us. But, we shift.
Absolutely. And this is what is so compelling to me is that you've got, your arms wrapped around or you're open to these two different ways and actually many different ways of bringing the concept and the ideas of mindfulness to a larger audience.
Absolutely.
What was I always like in these interviews to get a sense of how you came to be in the work that you're doing, and I'm curious about where you were raised and how you were raised, and mainly if you can look back now and reflect upon who you were as a child. Was there already evidence that you can look back in your own proclivities that kind of pointed to this might be the type of work that thrills you as much as it does?
Yes, my father, Dean Shapiro, is an academic and researcher and meditation practitioner, and so he wrote some of the very first books on meditation research back in the 1970s. And so meditation was always a part of my life. I think there's photos of me in his lap meditating when I was, 6 months old, 9 months old, and he taught me to meditate when I was quite young. So it was a natural part of my life. However, I didn't really begin my own personal practice till I was about 19. And I had just had back surgery at age 18, and it really shifted my life because I'd been quite an athlete, and all of a sudden I couldn't walk for some months, had to relearn how to walk, and was in bed
Mm.
a lot. And the next year, when I had recovered, I decided to do a outdoor leadership course in New Mexico, which is a month of backpacking and living in the wilderness. And as I was leaving, my father gave me John Kabat-Zinn's new book, Wherever You Go, There You Are. And I remember because it was a hardback, it had just come out, and weight was
You're
really
going backpacking with a heavy
exactly.
book.
I looked at him like, no, Dad, I can't possibly bring this. I can't even bring enough underwear. And but he really encouraged it. And so I had this book while I was living in nature for the first time, and I was reading about mindfulness, and it was the first time I'd heard of mindfulness. And John presents it in such an exquisitely simple, matter of fact yet beautiful way. And there was something about the just I felt truly awed by life, by the miracle of nature, by the miracle of the present moment. And when I came back from that trip, I decided I wanted to study mindfulness, and I didn't really care in what form or in what way, but I knew that this was my path.
And you were out in the wilderness. What a beautiful place to, to kind of come home and find a resonance within that probably, my guess is, was very well mirrored in the world around you.
Exactly. It was this deep sense of coming home, just like you said, where I all of a sudden felt like everything made sense, and I was at home in my body, I was at home in the world, and that everything was magical, truly, like in this extraordinary sense where I remember Einstein says either everything's ordinary or everything's extraordinary. And it felt like that. Like the world opened up to me. My senses were more alive, my thought processes, my emotions, everything became more vivid. And I knew that I wanted to keep exploring.
Especially when you had just experienced, probably one of your first real betrayals. Your body betrayed you. The world that you thought was going to unfold, athleticism and being out there in the world in a certain way, suddenly was taken away. Wasn't available.
Exactly. Yeah, it was the first time in my life where my body betrayed me, and my entire life path was very shaken because I was supposed to play college volleyball, and I'd gotten in early to Duke University to play there, and then all of a sudden I had to have back surgery and wasn't ever going to play again. And it's interesting looking back because I remember how devastated I was, and yet when I went to Duke, for the first time in my life, I actually had time to do academics instead of just focusing on sports. And so I actually really engaged in my classes, and was in the front row, and that was very different than high school. And it's really what allowed me to prepare for getting my PhD and becoming a professor was the fact that I had back surgery and my sports life got taken away.
Mm. So when you found this relationship, this with mindfulness and finding another way to be in the world, at some point you started traveling as well. Yes,
Mhm.
Thailand and Nepal, and did you study more mindfulness or meditation on those travels?
I did. It was interesting, mindfulness. As I completed my studies at Duke, mindfulness was a part of my life a little bit, but it wasn't. I hadn't found my rhythm with it. I was trying to integrate it, and yet no one else knew what I was talking about. And I was in North Carolina, and I decided to travel through Nepal and Thailand partly because of my interest in meditation, but I didn't have a clear sense. And I began by trekking through Nepal through the Annapurna Loop and Mount Everest, and met some beautiful, amazing people. And then when my friend and I went to Thailand after that trip, we were just kind of motorcycling around, going to the different full moon parties and traveling the island, and not deeply spiritual. And we met a monk, and he invited us into the monastery, and he invited us to sit and meditate with him. And it was really my first guided meditation instruction, because mostly it had just been through books and listening to CDs. And so I had this profound experience with him where I really could sense his peace and his joy and his lightheartedness. And when we opened our eyes, he looked at me and he said, "I think this is the path for you." And I said, "I think you're right." And so my friend left and went back to the full moon party on the next day. And I decided to stay, and he took me to a monastery called Wat Suan Mok. And I signed up for their, I think it was a 10-day or 12-day silent retreat on Vipassana.
Mm-hmm.
And they gave us some basic instructions, but it wasn't very thorough. And I just remember the monk saying, "Focus on the breath coming in and out of your nostrils." And so I began to do that. And like any good meditator, when I noticed that my mind wandered off, I would try harder.
Yes. Yes.
And my mind wandered off every couple minutes. So I was trying very hard, and I began to get very impatient and frustrated and very judgmental too. Like, what's wrong with me? Why can't I do this? By the second or third day, I was, thinking, who do I think I am? Do I think I can meditate? Do I think I'm a spiritual person? And why am I not back with my friend having fun? And by the fourth day, not only was I judging myself, I was judging everyone else around me. Like, what are they doing just sitting here? And why isn't anyone like doing something about the world? We're all wasting our life sitting in this monastery in silence. And by the fifth day, a monk from London flew in who spoke English because the head monk didn't speak very clear English. And so I went to have an interview, and he asked how it was going. And I said, not so well. And I explained to him what was happening, and he looked at me with so much compassion and also a bit of humor, and he said, "Sweetheart, you're not practicing mindfulness. What you're practicing is striving and frustration and judgment and impatience."
Yes.
And
And
let
you're
me,
doing very well at that.
yeah, and he was doing very well at this, and he said, "But listen, what you practice gets stronger." And those 5 words really changed my life. What you practice gets stronger. What he said is, if I'm practicing impatience and judgment and fear and anxiety, that's becoming stronger in my being. And now, so many years later, that I study neuroscience, and I realized he was talking about neuroplasticity, that our repeated experiences shape our brain. And mindfulness is not about striving and trying to get somewhere and trying to do it right. It's about paying attention with exquisite compassion, kindness, openness, with curiosity, being interested. Oh, wow, my mind wandered again. No big deal. It's just what it does.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that was really a pivotal moment in my practice and in my understanding of mindfulness.
Well, I know I've been to Vipassana retreats, and I remember sitting for one of my interviews, and the first thing that I said was, "This is the hardest work I've ever done." Trying not to work,
Ex-
trying not to strive, was really difficult, uh, and ultimately so liberating. Um,
And that's I think what people miss sometimes is that mindfulness is not a self-improvement project, it's a self-liberation project.
yes.
That we're not trying to be perfect or get better or do it right. We're actually we're actually guiding ourselves towards greater freedom. Um, and I think that shift in consciousness from striving to be good to opening to freedom is radical and transformational.
I want to explore that with you because this is another area that um, I thought about you again being a researcher and knowing so much about kind of what's happening within the body, within the mind, as well as being in the practice. My experience, probably your experience along the line, and most people who enter into meditation have that experience of starting to really drop into a full experience and then having the mind check in and saying, wow, we're meditating really good right now. And then you're out, it kicks you out. Um, and I know that I work with my clients as a coach, and I guide people as well into being more present with themselves and knowing themselves as who they really are. And I will be in my practice, and there will be times where I'll be dropping into a real sweet space, and a part of me will show up and want to look at it and examine it and saying, "Ooh, how do we guide others to this place?"
Mm,
So I'm looking at the experience and judging its quality and trying to kind of co-opt the experience.
mhm.
So for you, knowing as much as you do, um, was that something that you've really had to address? That you're in the practice, and are you visited by these ideas of, oh yeah, right now that part of my brain is thickening, and
Not so much, actually. It's interesting. I Mm, I notice judgments more on the other side of it. So it's not so much that I'm having this incredible experience and all of a sudden I pop out with saying, "Ooh, I wonder what part of my brain's lit up right now." What I've found has been a greater hindrance for me is judging my practice that I'm not doing it right or well enough or okay. That there's this sense of, um, of striving and trying to do it perfectly, so that when I notice my mind wander off, there's this kind of, "Damn it, Shauna, get back to the breath." And that's what I find with my clients and my patients that is most challenging is the internal critic that just doesn't seem to let us rest. And I remember one of the most healing teachings I received from Sylvia Boorstein was she invited me to notice the sound and tone of my voice when I brought myself back from wandering. So that if my mind wandered off, to notice how did I come back? What was the sensation in my body? What was the feeling tone of my voice? And to try to come back with kindness and even celebrating that moment, because in the moment you realize you've wandered off, you're already back. And so for me, it's learning how to work with my negative judgments and how they intrude upon the practice, and really inviting a greater sense of rest and ease and complete acceptance with things as they are.
Hmm. Yeah, let's talk about that. It helps me quite often to, when I'm judging myself in that way, to step back and say, well, what if a child came to me with the same concerns? I'm not doing it well. I've wandered. I've gotten lost. This is confusing. Would I look at the child and have that same stern, well, come on, what's wrong with you? I wouldn't say that.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah,
In some ways, mindfulness is like becoming our own parent,
yes,
the best version of our parents, the best
yes.
version of what a parent can be, where we invite our experience and we hold it in our kind, caring attention, just like we would hold our child and we say, "Oh, interesting, you're feeling afraid right now," or "Your mind is restless," or "You're scared." And there's a sense of, "I care about you, I'm interested," and there's no right or wrong. I just want to know what's happening for you right now.
That's beautiful. I was watching one of your videos recently when you were in Copenhagen,
Mm.
I believe in 2011,
Mhm.
and you gave such a beautiful definition of mindfulness. And you said that mindfulness is a way of being in the world.
Mm.
It is a way of being present in this moment. And then you went on to say, mindfulness is the awareness that arises when we intentionally pay attention and in a kind, open, and curious way. And you broke that down, and then you said, so let's take a look at that. Intentionally pay attention in a kind, open, curious way. And it had the parts of intention, attention, and attitude. And I
Mhm.
wonder if you can just speak a little bit more to those, which we are doing, but even more
Mhm.
so.
Absolutely. It's interesting because the experience at the monastery when the monk said, "What you practice gets stronger," really it, it crystallized for me that mindfulness is not just about paying attention. That a lot of times people think of mindfulness and they think, "Oh, it's just about being present in the present moment, paying attention." However, if that were true, then a sniper could be the most mindful person in the world because they have great attentional skills, right?
Yes.
So I developed this model of mindfulness that includes three elements that you noted: intention, attention, and attitude. Our intention is simply knowing why we're paying attention. Why are we doing what we're doing? Why are we practicing? Attention is our present moment awareness. And then our attitude is this kind, curious, open hearted attitude that I was just referring to. And I believe that mindfulness involves all three of these elements, and that when they arise synergistically, that is a moment of mindful awareness. So, just to speak a little bit about each one, intention, it really sets the stage for what is possible. It reminds us why we're doing what we're doing. And I love to think of it as kind of setting the compass of my heart.
Hmm.
I'm moving in the direction that I want to head. And I remember what is most important to me. And it was interesting actually when I was coming back from, I think not that trip to Copenhagen, but a second one. I went back to teach for the Danish government there. And I was away for 2 weeks from my 8-year-old son. He's now 10. And it was the longest we'd ever been apart. And I remember flying back and feeling really guilty and being concerned that I had been away too long and maybe would disrupt, our bond. And instead of going into shame or guilt or fear, I really set a clear intention and said, I really want my son to know when I get home that I'm I'm safe, he's safe, I'm here, I love him, I'm not leaving again. And so I made this commitment to myself that when I got home, we would spend the day together. I wouldn't open mail, I wouldn't check email, I would just have a day with Jackson. So I got home and I still remembered my intention. So we decided we were going to spend the day together. And I said, "How about if we go to the beach?" And he said, maybe, okay." But he didn't seem that excited. But I had this idea that going to the beach would be perfect. So I started packing up our beach gear and packed us a picnic lunch. And when everything was ready, I said, "Okay, Jackson, come on, let's go to the beach." And he's like, "No, I don't want to." And I had this moment where I was like, wait, come on, this is like going to be our reconnection. This is where I'm going to show you that I'm the perfect mom and that I love you. And
Right. Don't you understand? I have a plan here.
I have an agenda. So I was like, come on, sweetheart, let's go. And I helped him get into his bathing suit and we started walking out the door and I'm carrying all our stuff and I'm 10 feet ahead of him already at the car, already kind of going about my agenda. And I put everything away and I look back and he has sat down on our front porch and he's not coming. And I again had another moment and I felt the contraction in my body and I felt the impatience arising. And, luckily I'd just been teaching mindfulness for the past 2 weeks every day. So I had a little bit of awareness. And I paused for a moment and I remembered, what is the most important thing? What is my intention? Oh, yeah. All I want to do is connect with my son and let him know I love him and I'm here. And so I felt the impatience start to reside, and I walked back to our front porch and I sat down next to him. And he's looking at these ants. It's a really intricate line of ants, and they're actually pretty interesting. And I sat down next to him, and after a couple moments, I felt his body just start to relax. And he leaned his shoulder into me and kind of leaned his little body next to mine. And I could feel the sun on our backs. And I realized this is it. This is the most important thing. So our intention reminds us. And what I've noticed is that we forget so quickly why we're doing what we're doing. And we get kind of on automatic pilot mode, even with meditation itself. And so in the model, intention is where we begin. Why am I paying attention? Why am I practicing? It's simply remembering what the most important thing is. Suzuki Roshi has that great quote. He says, "The most important thing is to remember the most important thing." That's all.
That's it. That's it. If we could just do that.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's the first part of mindfulness is intention. The second part is attention, which although it's not the only important part, it is a very important piece. And what I try to help people see is that it's natural for the mind to wander. They're not doing anything wrong. In fact, what research shows us is our mind wanders about 47% of the time. That's quite a lot. And in fact, we have between 12 and 50,000 thoughts every single day that are distracting us and pulling us away. Although about 90 to 95% of those thoughts are the exact same.
Yes.
So they're not very interesting. They're, what am I going to eat? Why am I, too fat or too thin or too smart or too whatever it is? And so what mindfulness does is it teaches us to begin to let go of the story, let go of the thoughts, and come into the direct experiencing of the present moment, to actually be in our bodies, to actually sense, feel what's arising in this moment. And the reason we do this is so that we can actually see clearly what's here in the present moment. In fact, the word mindfulness means to see clearly. We're not trying to create an altered state. We're not trying to be relaxed or to feel good. We're trying to see clearly what's true.
And what shows up in that moment is not always necessarily easy
No,
or joyful or pleasant.
no, it's not. Sometimes it's quite difficult. And that's where the third element of mindfulness, the attitude, comes in. Because we need to have a really kind, safe, compassionate attitude as we pay attention and see clearly. Otherwise, it's just too scary to let the truth arise. And so the attitudes of mindfulness, this kind, discerning, open, curious attention, allows for all of our experience to be valid, all of it to be recognized. And I kind of think of it, it's like this big pot of mindfulness, and we allow our experience to kind of be cooked in this pot. And so the pot is always kind and compassionate and open. But what we put inside of it to be cooked sometimes is very dark, rage and shame and fear and jealousy. And so mindfulness isn't about being like kind and sweet and, Pollyannish all the time. It's about being real with whatever's here, but in a kind way, with compassion, so that we can begin to digest these experiences and allow ourselves to fully integrate them instead of repressing or suppressing or hiding from them.
It reminds me of one of the strongest takeaways for me from the the Vipassana retreat, and that was everything rises so that it may pass. And
Beautiful.
the witnessing, the curiosity, and to be able to watch it rise without identifying with it, and not saying, "Oh, I am the rage." It is an experience I'm having. It is an energetic. There's a energy within me that I'm experiencing, but that doesn't mean that I am that.
Exactly. It's the capacity to witness or see our experience without being completely lost in it. And yet, there's a danger in that I do want to point out, which is when we witness, oftentimes one of the pitfalls that meditators fall into is that when they say this rage isn't me or this sadness isn't me, they distance themselves so much that they actually don't feel in an intimate, vulnerable way the preciousness of that experience.
Yeah.
And so, what I like to say is we have this intimate detachment where we have the awareness that this thought is not me, this emotion is not me because it's rising and passing. It's not me because it's dynamic, but it's still here and I'm still experiencing it. And so, can I go in this very deep, intimate, vulnerable way, kind of like a zoom lens on a camera, and then also have the wide angle lens where I have perspective and distance and objectivity.
And does that then reference back to some of the science around when you do that, when we do that, that we are learning to be with an emotion, whatever is rising, an experience, in a way that we have not been before?
Exactly. It's referred to as affect regulation or emotion regulation, which is this capacity to be with strong experience without being overwhelmed by it and also without cutting it off, where we can actually know we're feeling something, actually experience the depth of the emotion, but not be overwhelmed by it. We learn to ride it like a wave, like we're surfing, and it rises up and then it passes. And there's this awareness that's always already here that is holding the experience so that we don't have to be afraid of it.
You can listen again and share this show and all the Beyond the Noise episodes at our website, beyondthenoisepodcast.com. What I particularly enjoyed about my conversation with Dr. Shauna Shapiro is how intimately familiar she is with mindful living, because it is so deeply embodied in her own life. I always find scientific research to be so much more compelling when it is brought into relationship with the researcher's own personal experience. In her most recent book, Mindful Discipline, A Loving Approach to Setting Limits and Raising an Emotionally Intelligent Child, Shauna draws from her role as a mother with a demanding career to help us navigate one of the most precious and vital arenas of the human experience, raising our children to be the next generation of conscious and compassionate souls. But perhaps what delighted me most about my interview with Dr. Shapiro was that I found her to be, above all else, a truly compassionate, kind, and emotionally wise woman who cares deeply about her work and all the lives that her work touches. I often look at it as if I had a little place in the forest that I went to every day where I felt whole and safe and enough. And I went there every single day, and there was a path that I had to walk to get there. That I'd make that path fairly well worn,
Mm,
and then I could find it in my sleep. I could find it without even thinking about it. I could just follow the path and be there. But if I only visited it every once in a while, that path would become overgrown, and it'd be harder to get to.
exactly. And this is the beauty of the science of neuroplasticity is it takes the metaphor that you just gave us and really demonstrates it from a scientific perspective, which is our repeated experiences shape our brain. These neural pathways get stronger every time we practice them. And so, if I'm practicing mindful awareness, if I'm practicing compassion, what begins like this little country road that we have to kind of dig out all the brambles and get rid of the bushes, every time we take that path, it becomes more well grooved until eventually it becomes this smooth superhighway that we can travel along without having to think about it so much.
Yeah, and the place that in my experience, the place that it takes me is like a pool that expands and expands and grows and then has no boundaries, so that it is no longer I only experience that when I travel there in my meditation. It is available now within a breath. If
Mhm.
and oftentimes without even thinking about it, it just becomes a part of my experience as I encounter the world around me.
Yeah, beautiful. And I think it's so encouraging for people to know that this awareness or this ease or this sense of being home is available in every moment, that you don't have to work really hard or you don't have to sit down for an hour in the perfect meditation posture to get there, that every moment matters. This moment matters, and all it requires is a rotation of consciousness to rest back into home, which is always here.
I'm curious, Shauna, for you, what's one of the words that comes up for you that best describes your experience of a benefit, a consequence, and an outcome of living more mindfully, especially being a single mom and a very busy professional, and you've got a very full life, and you practice mindfulness, and it delivers something to you or makes something available to you. What's the like the this is why I do this.
Yeah. It's actually lovely, even as you're asking me the question, and just by inviting that question, I feel a sense of ease in my body because the answer really is even in the midst of a very full, very chaotic life that has some real challenges that I'm experiencing and have experienced. There's a way in which, in just a moment, I can come home, that there's this place inside of me that I trust so deeply. And that sense of trustworthiness, that sense of trusting my own good heart, my own pure intentions, is such a refuge. And I haven't always had that. And I think this practice, as I've gone deeper and deeper, I've begun to really trust that part of myself more and more. And so wherever I go, just as John Kabat-Zinn said in that first book I read, wherever I go, there I am. And there's a place in me now that I trust, and that whatever's happening in the world, I can find it. And if I'm standing there and coming from that level of consciousness, then I know however things turn out, it'll be okay.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a common experience for me as well. As long as I felt that I was a separate ego entity out in the world trying to make my way, um, I didn't until I had that knowing that I was safe and that safety wasn't based on the external world. It was based on my knowing that I was whole already.
Mm.
Um, until I had that, I was always, kind of defending, and trying to prop up and keep the world around me, control it, to make it a world that I thought would bring me joy and happiness and safety. And the freedom that's been availed to me of recognizing I can let go of that tight control of trying to make my world a safe, happy place. I still try to do so and desire to do so, but not thinking that that's really where I'm going to get my sense of peace.
Exactly, and it's a challenging one. I hear you
Yes.
because I want to manipulate and control the world to try to find the happiness and peace for me and for my son, and it's a fine line, to engage with the world and to make choices and decisions, that are needed to be made, but to come from a place of surrender and to come from a place of trust and to allow things to unfold, to actually rest. One of my deepest practices right now is just resting, just sitting and resting and not doing anything.
What do you find, Shauna, to be the strongest or most prevalent resistance that you meet with your clients and your students and different people out in the world who maybe even go, yeah, got it. This would be really good. This could probably be really valuable in my life. But um, they're but it's scary, it's difficult, it's hard. What do you find to be one of the most prevalent ways or reasons that people resist?
I think that we're so caught in this culture of speed and doing that it is very challenging to actually make time to just be and to rest. And I think it's scary for people to um, to be with themselves. And there's this kind of crushing urgency and pressure to do and to achieve and to be a certain way. And so there's not a lot of support for just resting and being. And so a lot of the people I find that I work with, it makes sense to them, they get it, they really want to start a practice, and then they just don't find the time. And so where I really work with people is getting clear on their motivation and intention and starting really small and really slow. So you build up a lot of fire, a lot of desire that this is something I want to do, this is something important, I know why I'm doing it. And then making a commitment that we both know they can do, that they're not going to betray themselves or let themselves down by not doing it. And when we begin a practice, so when I have people sit and meditate, let's say they decide they're going to do 5 minutes a day, to always begin by first stating their intention, rekindling that fire, rekindling the motivation for practice. Because we forget really quickly. And I think the intention behind why we meditate is part of the practice. It's an essential component.
So in this world of doing, and it's a classic phrase, right? I don't have time to meditate. I'm too stressed. I love the quote by George Balanchine, the choreographer, who says, "Rest is a phase of movement."
Mm,
That it plays a part.
exactly.
Yeah.
Or even just, when you look at building your muscles and they need to kind of
Hmm.
wear themselves out a little bit and then rest. Like we tear them down and then they rebuild. And if we didn't have that pause in between, they wouldn't rebuild.
You and I had a little dialogue on Facebook a little bit, and others as well. There's a dialogue around denial.
Mm,
And we were all expressing our just how awestruck we were at the depth of and the power of how denial can show up
mhm,
in regards to What do you find some of the strongest denial to be around? I don't know if that's a valid question, but we'll see if it is.
I think it changes for each person. I think just the capacity for self-deception and denial is the common denominator, and I think what it's around is different. But I am truly awed by it, and in my own life, looking at things where I have blind spots, and even noticing when they start to come into awareness how fuzzy they are, and how blurry they are, and how easy it is to rationalize. And I think I actually have a dear friend who is going through some addiction issues, and I've never really experienced or faced this before, and I've been um, truly awed by the level of denial and self-deception and the split that can arise, and how painful that is, not only for the people around him, but for him himself. And so it evoked a great deal of compassion, and also just a great deal of curiosity around this human capacity to completely deceive ourselves. And I think part of it's a beneficial thing. I think when we were young, sometimes things were just too scary or too frightening or too overwhelming to really look at, and so we had to compartmentalize. And yet there's a time and a place where we need to look and see clearly through the lens of mindfulness and through the lens of deep compassion to say what is true and what is real. And that's why I believe mindfulness has to be understood as a compassion practice, that it's not just an attentional practice. Because if we don't have the compassionate piece, it's so painful and so terrifying to truly look at ourselves. And I'm not just talking about someone who has addiction, I'm talking about all human beings. We all have shadow in us. And to be able to trust our goodness, to trust our wholeness, even as we start to look at the shadow, even as we invite it in, we need to have a strong practice to do that. And we need to have tremendous support. And we need to go very slowly and gently. So I have deep respect for people who are willing to engage in the shadow work. And for me personally, I think it's a lifelong process. And the deeper my self-love, the deeper my compassion, the more I can recognize the truly terrifying parts of myself and others.
Well, that was part of the dialogue that came up was the recognition that then, of course, I have blind spots and you have blind spots. And there's areas that you and I are both still in denial,
Mm.
that perhaps our community, our friends, our family, can witness and recognize more so than we do. So when you speak to support, that's if I didn't have my community, if I did not have a strong, loving, compassionate, intentional community around me, oh, this would be really, really a difficult road to face my shadow
Mm.
and to feel the shame that can come up and have people hold me and say, no, you're still okay, you're still loved.
Exactly. The Buddha, there's a story and it says Ananda, the Buddha's son, came to him and he said, you know, what is the importance of friends and community in this practice? Is it half of practice and the other half is the teachings? And the Buddha responded, no, it is the whole of the practice. And I was so surprised that this was the response. And yet it makes sense that who we spend our time with, our community, our friends, they impact us. They impact our how we see things and how we see ourselves. And to get that reflection um, is so important for our practice and so important for our own understanding of who we are. There's this beautiful poem by Galway Kinnell. There's one stanza in it, and he says, "The bud stands for all things, even for those things that do not flower, for everything flowers from within of self-blessing. Though sometimes it is necessary to reteach a thing its loveliness, to tell it in words and in touch it is lovely, until it flowers again from within of self-blessing."
Mm.
Isn't that beautiful? And that's what we do for each other. We see the goodness, we remind each other, we say, hey, I see your goodness, I see your beauty. Remember who you truly are. Remember your noble heart.
I was having a conversation last night with somebody about the value of getting lost. And it feels like it harkens to that a bit as well. That, she was asking, why would we have this human experience where, we come in with the innocence and a real connection to source, and then, as young children, we do not have the wherewithal to necessarily know how to, stay in our center and know ourselves and the love of ourselves. So, we build up our defenses. And if we're paying attention and if we're doing our work and willing to look at the shadow, we start to, in our maturity, come back around to a re-knowing of ourselves. And in our conversation, we were saying, perhaps the getting lost in the coming back, the re-knowing is a deeper knowing.
Mm.
That there's it's sweet. I mean, when you find something you have lost, whether it be your sunglasses or,
Mhm.
anything, it's more precious. It's like, oh, that's right. So I love getting lost because when I come home, it always seems to be even more precious.
That's beautiful. I really love how you guys framed it. And yeah, I agree. I think there is value in getting lost. And I think it's important once we recognize we're lost, instead of going into the shaming and the blaming game, to really move right to compassion. And, it's interesting that the centers of the brain actually shut down when we shame ourselves, when we feel self conscious. The centers of the brain that have to do with learning shut down. And so, if we actually want to become unlost, if we actually want to learn new skills and behaviors and live our lives in a different way, we need to hold ourselves with compassion. That when we get lost in despair and shame, we actually we inhibit ourselves from truly changing.
Yeah, I find that so fascinating. And I'm really glad that you brought that up because I remember you speaking about it in one of your videos. And I think it is so important that we understand that there is a physiology at play when we are in a place of shame or fear that actually inhibits our ability to transform or grow.
Right. And of course, because when we are in shame and we're stressed and we're afraid, we're in fight or flight. We go into survival mode. When you're in survival mode, you can't be creative and innovative and see different perspectives and find new pathways. You get stuck. And so, part of the work that we do with people is starting to help them find safety and find ground so they can see clearly and then make different choices. And that's why I find mindfulness so exquisite is it trains us both in the compassion, the kindness, the settling, the calming down, and in the attentional clarity and the luminosity and the laser like attention. And so it's not just this like fuzzy, sweet, light, just love yourself and love everyone. There's the love, but there's also the wisdom. And that's really what the teachings are, is they liken it to a bird with two wings, and one wing is love and compassion and the other wing is wisdom.
Ah, oh, that's sweet. That's what, and if you took one of the wings away, if I only had the wisdom wing, then I'm just circling around wisdom, 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 wisdom.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. Brene Brown has a wonderful, who does all her beautiful research around shame and vulnerability.
Mm.
She has a question that she asks in her classes, and that is, who are those in your life that can hear your story, that you're willing to let in to hear your whole story, to know you completely? And it's remarkable when you ask that question and look at it, how small of a list that often is.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then to ask the question, and why? So you've said these three people, or these, six if you're really lucky. And and then why? How is it that these people show up in your lives that you trust them?
Hmm.
And oftentimes it's that willingness for them to be compassionate and non-judgmental and not try to fix, but simply to hold space.
Yeah, and it's really grace. Those kind of friendships and relationships, that it's grace when you meet fellow comrades who will really hold you with compassion, all of you, even the parts that you're ashamed of. I have one dear friend, her name is Juna, and I remember sharing something that I was very embarrassed about and ashamed of with her. And she looked at me and she said, I love you even more right now. Your vulnerability is so beautiful. And I started laughing and I said, you are the only person I know where I tell them something I'm embarrassed by and I actually feel closer to you
Yes.
instead of ashamed. And it's just been such a miracle of a learning to be able to rest in that love with other people.
The generation that I grew up in, I don't know that I had really anybody, any adult in my world who was intentional about teaching me to love myself and
Mm,
about self-love. And it
mm,
seems like perhaps, and as a mother of a young boy, it would seem like that's one of the, like if you did nothing else,
mm.
what is that one of the most
Yeah.
foundational things you can think of, just to teach your son to love himself?
So delighted you asked that question. In fact, I was giving a lecture on Monday and I said, when I reflect deeply on what I want most for my son, it is that he loves himself, that he actually feels worthy of love and that he loves who he is. And I said, and it's so strange because no one ever wished that for me, or that was never a goal in my life, self love. In fact, if anything, self love seemed a little bit indulgent and narcissistic. And yet, when I reflect on what I most want for my son, it's that. And I told my students this story when I was going through my divorce with my son's father. It was an excruciatingly painful time in my life. I was so worried about my son. He was only 3 years old, and I felt like I was ruining not only my life but his life. And to grow up in a family that was, separated and where there was animosity. And I had grown up with my parents happily married, and my grandparents were married for 70 years, and I really believed in marriage, and so leaving was really painful. And um, for a long time, I had these very negative thoughts. I would wake up every morning with just, "Oh, you've messed up my life, and you've messed up his life." And I remember going to my teacher, and I shared with her what was happening, and she said, it sounds like you're creating a lot of neural pathways of self judgment and a sense of shame, but you're not practicing a lot of kindness. So I'd like you every day to say, I love you, Shauna, um, you know, dispersed in between all this negative feedback. And I looked at her and I just said, no, that sounds so new agey and so, I'm like, what, do you want me to stand in front of a mirror naked and say, I love you, Shauna? And she kind of smiled and she said, okay, why don't you just say good morning, Shauna? When you wake up in the morning, could you just say good morning? And I said, yeah, I think I could handle that. So I went home and I started waking up. And when I woke up, instead of going right into the fear and anxiety of being alone, I would say, good morning, Shauna. And then I'd go into my son's room. I'd say, good morning, Jackson. And pretty soon it became this really sweet ritual where it was very intentional and conscious. And I would send a little note to my friends and say good morning to them. And I became known for saying good morning. And I went back to her a couple months later and she said, oh, how's the good morning practice? And I said, wow, it's really amazing. It's really supporting and helping me. I wake up and there's this kind of ray of sunshine instead of the self judgment. And she looked at me with this mischievous grin and she said, wonderful, you've graduated. Now I want you to say, good morning, I love you, Shauna. So I started saying, good morning, I love you, Shauna. And at first it was very rote. It felt, disingenuous, but I kept repeating that pattern. And a couple months in, I said, good morning, I love you, Shauna. And
Mm,
all of a sudden I felt it.
mm.
Felt my Nana's love. I felt my mother's love. I felt my son's love. And I actually felt my own love. And I remember just starting to cry when I realized, why was that so foreign to me to actually love myself? I was 35 years old and I had never felt real self love that I could remember. And I share that story with, I've shared it with thousands of people now. because I think we all live in this place of self-judgment and a sense that we're not okay, that somehow we're not quite doing it right. We're not doing this life right. And there's something so sacred and so precious about learning to accept and love ourselves. And I wish I could say that every morning when I say good morning, I love you, I feel that self-love and that I've walked around in this bubble ever since. And I haven't. There's still a lot of self-doubt and judgment, but I know how to find that place again. And I now value loving ourselves. And it's one of the greatest wishes that I could have for anyone.
Well, thank you, Shauna. Thank you for holding space and having such love and passion for the work that you do, and inviting that opportunity for people to love themselves and for people to find that place of stillness and peace. It's such valuable work and exciting work. For me, I'm one of those who the science of it is really fun. I like that. So the art and science of mindfulness is a beautiful blend, and so thank you.
No, you're so welcome. It's been a joy.
Beautiful. Thank you, Shauna.
Thank you.
To learn more about Dr. Shauna Shapiro and to read her articles, listen to her meditations, and watch her videos, visit drshaunashapiro.com. That's Shauna, Shauna, Shapiro.com. To work with me for personal or leadership coaching, or to attend a workshop or international retreat, you can visit me at chessedwards.com. You can listen to this episode again and all of our interviews on iTunes and at our website, beyondthenoisepodcast.com. This is Ches Edwards, and this is Beyond the Noise, conversations at the heart of modern day living.